This video does a high-level technical planning and the decisions required before we do our internal code planning. Hey guys, welcome back to this YouTube video. Today I'll just go over the first high-level technical planning that we've done. If you didn't watch last week's video, I went over the boxed out high-level overview, which you can find in the README if you go to github.com/foldstacks/boxed out. Today I would like to go over the technical planning and overview. This document will tackle what we've laid out in phase 0, which is described in the original planning in the README that I just showed. The goal for this document will be to focus on the technical decisions around how we will be managing the overview that we discussed in this document. If you haven't watched this, just to give you a quick overview, there's going to be 9 pieces of software developed. For today's video, we want to decide on the technical aspects of the 5 services above. There's 3 main questions that we want to answer in this document as we go through it. This document is complete already, so I'm just going to go through what I was thinking and why I made certain decisions. The first thing we want to do is figure out how we will be building the management services. The second thing is how the code will be structured. And the last thing is how do we plan on extending the functionality / deprecating older functionality. This is a very important part because the services is basically the product that we are building. The clients will just be interacting with the service. So it's going to be the biggest focus at the beginning, and then we'll start building the app to incorporate all the functionality from the services. The first major thing that we have to tackle is something that has already been decided, and that is which backend infrastructure we'll be using to build this product. Given what I mentioned about a single full stack developer like myself or a small development team, we are going to be using Firebase as our backend. Firebase is a collection of services and products that helps you manage your product better. One of the community members in FoldStacks mentioned in the discussion issue, actually not in this discussion issue, he mentioned this to me on LinkedIn. Let me just get his name so that I can give him a little shout out. He mentioned to me Peter Williams. He watches the channel. I told him I'm going to put it on here so I'm not breaking any privacy rules that he might have. He just said it's a good thing to mention to the devs that they will need the Blaze ban, which requires you to add the Google billing account to access cloud functions. And just to add something on top of that, if you want to make a request from a cloud function to a service outside of the current set of cloud functions, you also have to include the Blaze plan because you need the Google billing to be enabled for them to be able to charge you for that functionality. He mentioned quite a lot of things in here. I will most likely put this in the discussion, which is the issue with the discussion tag on it. And I'll just put it in there after this video so that once the video is out, you guys can go through and read that. He has very good points, and I appreciate Peter reaching out to me without me asking and giving me some of the advice of the things that I didn't think to mention in the technical document. So let's get back to this. So we'll be using Firebase as the backend. It has everything that we need to build and run the project. The 3 big things that we want to get from Firebase is authentication, the reactive database, and the cloud functions. The cloud functions specifically because then we can write each of our endpoints as a standalone microservice and treat it as such as well. This will give us a clear separation and goal for every single tutorial that we do, and we'll be able to focus only on the function at hand and how the other pieces will interact with it. So let's get on to more technical details after deciding on Firebase. We want to decide on what language we are going to use for the backend. Now there's two options. You can use JavaScript and Node.js, or you can use TypeScript. I think we will definitely use TypeScript. The reason is because of the typed nature. I find it easier for myself to structure code in a certain way when I'm using a typed language. I've never used TypeScript for any production code. The closest I've come is on the FullStack's website. I used a template from Vue that was written in TypeScript at the beginning, which I then changed to pure JavaScript. I think, if I remember correctly, it might still be TypeScript. With that said, I haven't used TypeScript, so I'll need some help on that when putting out the code. I'll most likely ask for code reviews in the repo from the community whenever I push new code. I'll create a PR and I'll allow it to be public so that anyone can comment on that. This will be most likely the slowest part of the building because I've never used TypeScript, but once I get up to speed with it, it'll be quite easy to assume that we'll be building these functions faster and in a more concise manner. The second thing that we have to cover in this section is how will we manage functions as a service. I don't think this is required. The functions we are using can all be treated as separate and idle microservices. It's basically exactly what they are. The only kind of management we'll need to do is to deploy them using a certain naming convention to help identify functions, their functionality, their version, and what group they belong to. In terms of the groups, we'll basically put it in line with the product architecture that we've laid out. There's going to be 5 groups at this point. There's most likely going to be more. We'll use the naming of the URL endpoints to indicate to us what set of functions we are working on. This will give us a clear indication on what we are calling and what group it belongs to. Another part of the managing, which we are covering now, is basically being able to track issues. The way we do that on backend services is primarily through logging. And what we'll do is use the cloud logging from the Google Cloud Suite, which was previously known as Stackdriver. We use that in our production Flutter apps as well, and it works quite well. You log structured logs to the cloud logging system, and then you can do filtering and you can set up alerts for certain things and add some thresholds for a certain amount of warnings or errors throughout a certain lifetime of the functions running. So that'll cover everything in this. Let's just go over that quickly. How we will build and manage the services. The first thing is we're going to be using cloud functions written in TypeScript. Those functions will all be grouped together through the URL endpoint, and each of those will be grouped under one of the 5 things that we have already defined. An additional thing is that we will start out with the logging setup and logging so that we can write every function from the beginning with the exact structured logs that we would need down to its verbose and tracing levels to make sure that whenever we need to perform our management tasks, which is things like finding out what's wrong, fixing the bug, deploying, and then making sure everything is still working. Once we get to that point, we'll be able to do all the logging, and I think that will cover all the management in terms of the decisions we have to make before we start the actual technical, the architecture overview planning. The second thing we have to cover in this, how we will manage our services, is getting down to the code part. Now, one of the confusing things that I've seen beginners do, well, one of the things that confuse beginners is how to structure their code. The reason for that is because they don't apply the abstraction that the code will be following to their source control or the actual source files. So usually the lack of abstraction is the thing that causes the problems with the visual imagery that you create when trying to debug a system or just trying to build a larger system. Luckily for us, we followed the correct steps, meaning we have the high-level overview, so we know exactly the major parts of the code base, and so we can abstract our code itself into those certain things. Within the source folder, we know that we have two major abstractions. There's the backend and then there's the clients. For the backend, we have the 5 groups that we mentioned, and for clients, there's currently going to be 4 client applications. Now, one of the other things that was asked is if it's really necessary for us to have 4 different UI clients, and that we could combine the restaurant and the restaurant manager at the very least, and then also what is the difference between the two. Now, I did answer those questions, but I just want to go over that again so that everyone is on the same page. The restaurant app will be sitting in the actual restaurant. That's going to be where the waiting staff is, where the chefs are, and where if they have their own drivers, those drivers will be at that restaurant as well. The restaurant app will be specifically to tell the restaurant that they have a new order. They'll be able to see what's in the order. They'll be able to quote a preparation time, and then once that's done, they'll be able to mark it as ready for the drivers to then be able to go and pick up that order and deliver it. This will be communicating basically directly with the customer app, because as you indicate what you are doing in the restaurant app, the order management system will notify the customer app so that it will know, okay, they've said it's going to be ready in 25 minutes, so we'll send them a time of 35 minutes to account for the driving, given how far the distance will be as well. So that's in the restaurant app. The restaurant manager has nothing to do with taking orders or letting the customer know how long the order is going to take. Combining these two will be combining 2 separate functionalities into one very large code base that will most likely, in all cases, the one section will not be used with the other one. So 50% of your code won't be used in every scenario that you can think of. The restaurant manager itself gets given to sales representatives of the restaurant, the franchise managers, people that's in charge of the menus and modifying opening times and all of those things. Now, in some cases, it is true that that will be the same person. You as the owner won't be the waiter as well. I know in some cases that is how it works. And if that's the case, at night you'll want to access a different app instead of checking the app where you're getting your orders to manage your restaurant. That's the reason it's going to stay separate. There will always be different use cases for both of them, and I think keeping them as the single use case that they are will make it easier to develop as well as maintain over the long run. That was answering that question. If you guys do want to have the discussions with me, I'm posting every discussion for every next video about a week before the video comes out, so I'm happy to reply to anything that you mention. I'll give my feedback on what you said. In most cases, I have taken those feedback and I've actually adjusted my ideas around like building this thing, because we're still in the planning phase, so it's very malleable at this point and easy to be manipulated. Whereas when we start and it gets a bit bigger, if you guys do give input, then I'll still take it very seriously, but it'll be quite difficult to rebuild anything. So please, in the future, if you guys do want to give your input, I'd be very happy with that, given that I would like this to be more of a community project than the videos just being shared and you guys watching it. I do also enjoy doing that, so either way it's going to be fine with me, but I would prefer more input so that we can build a robust system, and I want to make sure that we keep it to the correct amount of scope. I'm thinking it's going to take about 50 to 60 videos, which is just over a year of development. I only have 2 days in the week to do the code and then make the video for that code, so it's gonna be quite tight. I'm trying to figure out a way how you guys can contribute to the code so that I can maybe just do reviews on the pull requests as we change that code up. The main thing that we will be doing is that all of these folders will contain the functions and the source code for each of the backend management systems, but all of them will be connecting to the same Firebase application. Same goes for these applications down here. So there's one thing that I need to figure out, which someone has tagged already, which is with the Firebase rules. I know the rules overwrite whenever you deploy new rules, and I wanted to keep all of the Firebase security rules for the project and for the collection of information in that specific folder. I don't know if it'll be possible, but someone has tagged me with an NPM question where they said that I will be able to, where was that? There we go. I made this issue to check if we can concatenate the Firebase rules from the different projects into one and then deploy that on its own. So most likely there'll be another folder in the backend called security, and that will contain all of our security measures set up around the Firebase rules for the Firestore, as well as the cloud services and anything else that requires security rules. The last thing was to cover how we are going to plan our version management. Now, I haven't made a decision on this yet, but I'll give you guys the two options and you can decision in the discussion as well if you have something, or you can make a new suggestion if it's better than what we have here. So how are we going to do the versioning of our systems? There's going to be two options. The first one is to build an all new functionality to be backwards compatible every time we make a release. Now, I've worked like this with a backend engineer called Werner, and he is extremely good at these things, and he's the one that made me very aware about backwards compatible code and the reasons why we would want to have that. So I've enjoyed doing that. It's just that the code becomes a bit more complicated over time, given that you have to keep the older code. I guess you can deprecate at some point and do forced updates for clients. If we can do that, then I'm fine with doing that, because then we can manage 2 versions back, or maybe 3 even, and do it that way. Number 2 is to add the version into the cloud function URL. This keeps the code simple but increases the amount of code to maintain over time. So I don't know which one is better, but I'm leaning towards the backwards compatible functionality at the moment. The backwards compatible, the API will always stay simple and exactly the same. The code for that API will not look so clean though. So it's a trade-off that we have to decide on. I'm leaning towards number 1, and I hope you guys will actually give me some input on what you would like to use for managing versions of Firestore Cloud or Firebase Cloud Functions. The conclusion of this document is that the clients will be developed in Flutter and Dart, which we've known already. We're going to be using Firebase and the Cloud Functions API, which will all be developed in TypeScript. Each of the groups of the Cloud Functions will be maintained in its own folder with all its source code and deployment scripts. If possible, then I'd like each group to manage or at least house its own Firestore security rules. That issue is being tracked here, and I think it is possible. We'll use a backwards compatible implementation of API version management for now. If I get better suggestions, we will definitely switch to that one. Like I mentioned in this document, I need some input from some more advanced backend developers. I've worked on a backend. The largest backend system I've built, along with a guy I mentioned earlier, was about 50 microservices using .NET Core and Service Fabric from Microsoft. I'm quite comfortable that I can rebuild a microservice style system using the Cloud Functions API only. I wanted to go over what's next so that you guys can leave some comments, give some feedback, and help me with the planning for this. The next thing, there's 3 major things that I would want to tackle. This is basically the more in-depth planning after the selection of technology and the management of the system. This will actually be how each of those management systems will be talking to each other and propagating data from a client through other systems. We want to establish how the data will flow through the most important processes. This will be similar to how we discovered the overview for the actual product. We will do a step through of how users will let us know what they want, and then following our management calls on how we will populate that through the system. Once we do this for a single big process, like placing an order and getting that order completely delivered, every single smaller process that we have to build will follow this exact same setup. So we'll abstract how we are writing that and building it, and we'll make it easy for us to extend and modify the system once we have established the flow of information through the management services. The second thing we'll need to establish is all the data models that will be required for us to get the information from the client to the restaurant and then back to the client in the form of an actual product being delivered. This will give us a high-level overview, actually not so high level. This will give us a good overview of the data structures that we would need in order to manage this whole product. And the last thing would be which data collections will be required to get this information through. So the way that this is different from the data models is that the models will define how we will actually describe the information to a client. We'll have something like an order or a cart, or we'll have a product, we'll have a merchant or a restaurant. We can have a menu item, we can have options, and those things will all have properties. For this third point where we want to establish which collections will be required, for that we will need to identify permanent and temporary data structures that will help us complete this process from getting an order and converting that into a product and returning that to the user. By doing this process, we'll figure out the collections, which one will be permanent, which ones will be required for temporary types, and then also if we are going to store any of that information through a caching type system so that we don't tax our Firestore database too much. That'll be in the next video. It'll be more coding related. I'll be drawing some things on the screen again so that we can have some visual guide towards what we are talking about. And I think, well, for me, this is one of the more fun planning processes because I can actually go through and get a more concrete example in my head of how this data will flow, which will give me a better estimate around how long it's going to take to actually build this product. Once we can guess within a 3 to 5 month range of the delivery for this product, we are at a good place to start planning the actual code and the things that we're going to be tackling first. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please go to github.com/fullstacks/boxedout and start the repo. I create issues when I do my planning, which you can start the discussion with immediately. I'm going to start on Sunday with the next step, so I'll be posting my images, the ideas of what we want to do, the steps that I want to follow through. If I miss anything, I would really appreciate if you guys can help me to point out certain steps that I might have missed in the actual steps that we want to follow, and that will allow us to just have more details and a bigger overview of the project and the plan that we want to go on to complete this thing. Building a food delivery service in 1 year is quite a challenging task. If you're going to do it using 1 day a week, I think it's even more challenging. If you add on top of that you want to make a tutorial for every single piece of code that you write, I think that's quite a big challenge, and I'm excited to start doing it because I think it'll be quite impactful. There's a lot of people that has benefited from the first video, which I thought was going to be very boring, but everyone liked it, and I'm very happy to be making the second video. So thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in my issue section, hopefully, for the next few days, and we'll discuss the rest of this project on there. Thank you. Bye-bye.